Tonight on Ship Chasing, Mike Leone joins us to talk about best ball deep dive. He's been deep in the spreadsheets, looking at BBM3 data, cooking up ways that we can win BBM4, all tonight on Ship Chasing.
Pat Fryer Helmuth.
This is why I'm hot.
Anita Handjob.
Fix your sight.
Jamar. Alpha play chase.
Are you kidding me? Kadarius Toney?
You can't handle the heat.
It looks like we're finally piss boys. You're right.
Pat, I absolutely hate this bit. I start the show without our guest even here yet. Our guest says, hey, 1 sec, I'm running a few minutes late. Because of these comments, have these guys ever been on time? I literally started the show at fucking 9:15 p.m. Eastern on the dot. I hate this bit.
I'm eating chips. I mean, I don't like it either. I was thinking Leone would be here and just the two of us. I'm trying to, I was trying to pack in a little last minute snack.
I would say it's very disrespectful to be eating on these airwaves, but I ate half a Caesar salad on the Swolecast earlier today, so I guess I can throw
a Swolecast. Oh, there's a Swolecast for me to listen to. What a delight! I didn't know.
It's actually a very fun one. Dan Bach was subbing in for Tuttle, who was preoccupied. I had no idea. Apparently, Dan Bach went viral, like mega viral, over the weekend with a golf tweet, and then it got so viral he had to delete the tweet. So yeah, if you want to hear about that, you can check out the Swolecast today.
I will be checking out the Swolecast as soon as this show is over.
Yeah. Pete's or Graham says, what's Leone's punishment? No punishment. I mean, it's hard enough getting these guys on these shows. He's all he wants to do is just be deep in his spreadsheets. He doesn't even want to talk to other humans. So no punishment for Leone. My haircut makes me look 10 years older. Really? All right. I guess I'll take it. Fake young, real old. All right. Pat, how are you doing tonight? Other than
doing good.
Yeah.
It's 80 degrees in New York.
Yeah.
It's 80 degrees. It is April. While it's not necessarily reflective of a great situation long term for the earth, it's a nice day in April. That's and we're taking it in New York.
I've made many jokes along those lines this year because I bought a new snowblower because we moved to a house and I needed a snowblower. I was getting ready for the New England winter, bought it in like October, never used it, didn't pull my snowblower once. And I've made lots of, global warming jokes about that I don't think my father-in-law appreciates, but it is what it is. Leone has made it here tonight. You are wearing your Ship Chasing shirt. Is that like wearing the band shirt when you go to the concert? Is that allowed?
I don't know, but I was told
I've done it many times.
Okay.
Yeah, I will say, Leone, it is crazy that the very number one association that people now have with you in this show is running while on the show. The amount of comments in the chat right now on Twitter of people just expecting you to be on your phone broadcasting while training is incredible.
I'm disappointed that's not why you were late. Is that what you were doing?
Did. Yeah, I did have to run tonight.
All right.
I saw some comments when you guys tweeted it out about me running, and I was gonna be like, I shouldn't actually run for this show, right? I was gonna ask you guys, and I was like, no, we're not doing that. I'm not even.
It's one of those things where
if you'd asked us, we would have told you that.
I think it has to be organic. That night, it was perfect because we really wanted to draft. You really needed to go on a run, and you're like, fine. The only way that I can still stay on here is if I actually multitask and run. Yeah, Leone, you just asked, are you lagging? I think Pat's lagging because Pat.
No, I'm lagging. Yeah, I'm lagging.
Get your shit together.
But it catches up for some reason. No, it didn't that time.
Okay,
Pat, leave and come back. This won't be sustainable for an hour.
No, it's good now. My mouth is just a touch behind what I'm saying.
I mean, it's okay for me visually. I just felt like I started talking a couple of times, and I don't know if you guys can hear.
Michael wants to get in the weeds on running. He wants to know, how is your training for Toronto going, and what training program are you following?
It's going pretty well. I feel like really beat up and tired at this point in the training, though. I was doing really good like the first half of the training, like hitting all my runs. And now at this point, I'm like got like a hamstring strain. I've got like a hip flexor thing. I just feel old and beat up. And like I was supposed to do 6 miles tonight, and I like ran 3 extremely slow miles and just called that a W. But I'm part of a run club here, and the woman that runs it, Melina, is awesome, and she's actually the one who's captaining our Ragnar team. So she has a run plan for me. My last huge long run of the training session is this Saturday. It's a 20-mile run at, if you're familiar with Western New York at all, it's at Chestnut
20-mile
Ridge.
run?
Like, yeah, I did a 20-miler a couple weeks ago, but this one's going to be very hilly. So I'm like, it's going to be pure torture.
Yeah, 20 sounds. Sounds like a lot.
You're out there for a long time.
20 is the whole thing. What? That's a training run?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a marathon's 26.2.
You got to get to 26, Pat.
I understand that, but I honestly, if I was training for a marathon, I'd do like 15 max. I would never.
Well, Pat, you would not complete a marathon.
Well, that's true. I never will complete a marathon. That's fair enough. But I can't imagine doing 20. That's like basically a fucking marathon. You're doing 20 just to train?
Well, but I mean, I'm doing it slower pace than I'll do the marathon, and water stops.
Sorry for yelling.
Taking some goose. I didn't mean to get you all excited.
Well,
I know it's 70 degrees, but like
it's not 70, it's 80, Leone. It's 80. It's April 12th.
Pat, your lag isn't.
Yeah, you're lagging bad. You're
Pat,
lagging.
log off. Pat, go reboot. This is unacceptable.
I do feel like Peter's so good at dealing with your lag that's why I thought I was lagged, because you're just like used to it. Do golfing this Friday though. I can't wait. Like actual outside golf.
Man, I haven't golfed in. I only got to go like a couple times last summer because
you played that shit course in Colorado.
Oh my god, dude, that was probably the last time I played. Honestly, that was honestly the last time I played, because that was like mid-July, and then I moved, and I haven't played since. Yeah, that was a. But you played down in Florida recently, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. So I'm acting like this is the first time outside, but I just played down in Florida a few weeks ago. But it's different. It's first time outside in Buffalo.
That was where the Herzig photo was. Where did you know when that was getting posted that was going to go poorly for you?
Oh yeah, I posted it initially, and I knew, I was like, oh god, this photo looks terrible. I was like, whatever, I'm just gonna post it. I totally I knew it was gonna go. My self-awareness might not be great, but like you can't really look at that photo and be like, oh my goodness, we look great.
Well, it's like I've met you in person. I've seen it. I was like, this is such an unflattering angle and everything for you. I was just like, this is. I just pulled it up, and Mike, I thought this was a Photoshop version, but this is the real version. I was like,
that's the actual photo.
I don't know why. I don't know what it is that makes it so funny. I'm like, this doesn't even look like you.
Well, you're not that short. Like
right.
Like
I mean,
the difference between you and Herzig isn't that short. Isn't that how did I met Herzig? He's not that much taller than you.
I think he's like 6 foot.
Yeah, but what are you, 5'3"?
I'm 5'8".
Yeah, but then you look 5'3".
Yeah, no, I know. It looks absurd. I'm also wearing my very loud outfit, and like it looks like my body, my torso, as people noted, is like super elongated.
You're melting a little.
What's funny is my brother-in-law, who like takes great pride in stuff like taking a good photo, took this photo. He blames Justin because he said just before this, Justin took a photo of me and my brother-in-law, and he said it looked so bad that he like overcompensated for the angle. He's like, oh, it was in my head.
There's something with your facial expression too. That's just...
yeah.
there's a lot going on. The socks.
There's a lot. Well, you have like a smile that I can only describe as woodland.
You do have very elfish features.
It's
elfish. Your whole smile.
Face.
It looks like there's something wrong with half my face. It does.
Yeah, your ears look particularly perky.
Okay. Enough. I do have big ears. They like stick out.
It's not bigness. They're just Look a little pointier than usual.
I do. Nez actually brings up a key thing. Why does there need to be so much space below the feet? This is a composition thing. Always align the foot with the bottom of the frame. I do think that's a big part of this. I mean, we're getting to see a ton of Florida concrete here. All right, Leone.
There's so much concrete. Yeah, why? Who took this photo? Because it's one of the worst. It's one of the worst photos. I mean, unless you're into comedic photography, in which case it is a masterpiece.
I'm gonna send my brother-in-law the first 10 minutes of this show so and think about what he's done.
Yeah, there's like rule of thirds, but that's normal for like vertically how you want to position it. He did like rule of thirds, or sorry, in the vertical direction where he's like 1/3 sky, 1/3 subjects, 1/3 concrete.
1/3 cement.
Wow, this is so bad. JGFC, I got to be honest, this photograph changed my image of Leone. Leone,
it's confusing for me because I've met Herzig and I've met you, and like it does, like you are closer than that. Like I'm like, I feel like I have an objective comparison of you two, and it's not as far as that photograph makes it seem.
I have more empathy for Davis now because I feel like this is like Peter and Davis. They had a pretty iconic photo.
Yeah, the when you guys met Laird.
Well, and I assume everyone has seen the Lou Dog Photoshop of that one with. I keep saying Davis, but it's actually me on it. Here we go. Let me.
Is it? I thought it was Davis on it.
That's me as Davis.
Yeah, everyone.
Oh, that's you as Davis.
Yes, dude. Davis. Yes.
I just thought it was Davis.
Oh, that makes it so much better that you didn't know what that Photoshop was.
Oh God. Oh. I thought it was Davis.
You actually thought that?
I didn't look super closely because when it I just saw it in my I didn't click on it. I just saw it in my feed and I was like, yeah, I do look like Davis.
It is Pat. Didn't you post a screenshot? Was it in your Discord where you were saying that when you search Davis, the number one Google image result is now me?
Yes, because I asked in my Discord, I was like, what emojis should we have? And so I was like, we need one of Davis. So I was like, I was Googling Davis, and the number one search is now your face.
Well, I want to
Google Davis Maddock. The number one result is you.
Oh, Lou makes an appearance on there too.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna make a golf bet with Davis.
Yeah, you should. Did you hear another piece from the Swolecast today? Davis told us that he got last place in one of his hometown fantasy leagues, and his punishment is he has to run the 40. So I'm very excited for that. I don't know if that's going to be.
Is he training for it? Is he going to try to put in a good performance?
I mean, all this guy does is squat and deadlift. I don't think he's training any sprints right now.
He does the Stairmaster at like level 1.
If I had to run a 40, I would.
All right, Michael. Enough of the bullshit. Let's get down to the brass tacks. How do I win Best Ball Mania 4? Damn it.
Well, you just repeat exactly all these things that happened a year ago, and you make no adjustments because they worked last year.
Perfectly predicts the future.
So they're gonna work again.
So all jokes aside, you are fresh off of 2 parts of your Best Ball Mania manifesto, a guide to winning big on Underdog Fantasy. Obviously, super great article up on ETR if you guys haven't checked it out. And it is, I'll continue to confirm this. It is all free, not behind the paywall, right, Mike?
Correct.
Yeah. I have the link down in the show notes if for some reason you guys haven't checked it out. And how many more installments do we have coming?
So there's 2, but I keep coming up with more ideas of things I want to do. So I think at some point I might have some follow-up stuff. But this Friday will be like roster construction, positional allocation stuff, which I'm doing a little bit differently than I did in the past. I used to look at like early picks and I kind of bucketed all early picks as a top 5 pick and then total number at a position. This time I looked at like draft capital spent at the position. So it could have been spent in a variety of ways and kind of bucketed it that way. Not necessarily.
This is like the missing link of all this analysis, in my opinion. I'm super excited for this. I'm literally like looking forward to this part of your article, like You know, I'm in line. I'm in line for the newest release of a Marvel movie or an iPhone or whatever the fuck.
You're going to be pretty happy with how poorly it makes running backs look from last year.
Oh, am I?
You will be quite satisfied as you spend less draft capital at running back. Everything goes up.
That's shocking to me. But Mike, don't they score so many points?
I don't know. You're the one who took too early and won $2 million.
But then when did I take my next one? Not.
I'm working on. I actually just wrapped up my video that's going to be coming out soon. I got it all over to the editor, and one of the things Michael Dubner had pointed out to me when we were researching it too is what you're saying, Mike, in that the advance rates for like double anchor RB were awful last year. I just somehow threaded the needle with the two perfect ones there. But yeah, on the whole, it was disastrous.
Yeah, they were much better the previous 2 years. The roster construction stuff in particular is like kind of bad to look at 1 year because it can be so affected. But I mean, there's a few reasons why it happened that way, but why you would do zero RB. Like teams that spent less draft capital at running back were more likely, because I did in part 2, I looked at like the importance of ADP closing line value and what part 3 shows, because I wanted to dig in a little bit why spending less at running back did good. And part of it was you just got more opportunities to get really good closing line value on ADP. And of course that extends in season 2, which we're not even accounting for.
Wait, because running backs tend to be some of the bigger values. Is that why?
Yeah. Like you had Ramondre, Damian Pierce, or if like a back gets hurt, you just see them leapfrog rounds, I think, to a higher degree than you do other positions. Not to say that it doesn't happen at other positions, and I mean, that's the whole thesis of running back though, right? Because it's a volume game. It's like a role game that if the role switches, the value immediately switches, right? And we see some of that, you know, with younger rookie backs like Damian Pierce, who just emerge over the course of the offseason, or there's an injury to somebody and somebody else.
Can we back up a little bit just to give people a sense of the first two parts in case they're not super familiar? So the first part, you talked about stacking and how important that was. And the second part, you talk about kind of having ADP value and how important that is. And actually a number of different factors, including making sure you have a lot of live players in your lineup, which I guess there's not a ton of ways to make sure that you have that because a lot of it's injury related. You also talk about when to draft, whether to do slow or fast drafts. So this article's covered like a number of pretty key elements. But to get better closing line value, it sounds like.
So the running back stuff, you know, we can circle back on, but yeah, you're more likely to get closing line value. Also, like people are just over investing in running back. Like even if you assume running back and wide receiver were equal, people are over investing in running back. And then like just to begin with, but like they're also not equal. But even if they were equal, people are building too. Like I looked at like the break even point just by like the number of starting roster spots. Like if you use that ratio as your draft capital ratio, so like 3.4 starting wide receiver spots versus 2.4 starting running back spots, assuming they're like equally used in flex, like that ratio is like 1.4 to 1. So I looked at the draft capital spent. Like if you just split it down the middle, teams that had like a smaller ratio than 1.4 to 1 and teams that had a bigger, people are like the ratio leans running back heavy. But
when you say draft capital, you don't mean roster spots. You mean the like almost like an auction dollar value that you're spending on the positions, right?
Yeah, there is somewhere. I know this is a really long article. There's somewhere in there where there's a good graph of the draft capital. But basically, I looked at points above replacement player that were contributed to your roster for each team in BBM and came up with a model and then just kind of scaled the model so that 0 was the lowest. And that's how I came up with these values. So as you would expect, picks early are worth more than picks late. You know, it's not a pure linear thing. Right. But yeah, start out with stacking. I mean, we kind of jumped the gun here a little bit, but start out, just wanted to look at the importance of basically what I was trying to do was to incorporate analysis that I've done in the past, which is like these regular season advance rates with like actually looking at, we know the playoff weeks are the most leveraged weeks. These are the most important weeks. So like, how can we kind of combine those two things to get a better idea of what was a good strategy and why things worked the previous season? And if we have a really good understanding of what worked, why it worked between regular season advance rates, playoff win rates, and all that, we'll be able to learn from it and then hopefully come up with better strategies for BBM4. It's not that you want to replicate this stuff exactly, but it's really good to understand like why things worked.
Yeah, and I know we're now jumping back and around, but it does track too about like the running backs jumping up in value, because we do see wide receivers jump up, but it's almost always injury related, right? Like someone gets injured, and then what was it? Tim Patrick a couple of years ago bumped up like 4 or 5 rounds or something. But the running backs have the chance to move up simply by training camp buzz, depth chart shuffling, like Ramondre taking over, like the Dameon Pierce. So it does seem like in general, running backs have more
and
outs.
injury. And I think they have the most injury potential in terms of moving up in value. So, yeah.
So let's dig into the stacking stuff, Mike. I guess there are, I would say, some intuitive stuff, maybe some non-intuitive stuff. What was like the most interesting takeaway you had from looking at the stacking data?
Yeah, I mean, shout out to you guys. I know, Pete, you made the week 17 is all that matters video, but I was definitely surprised at how much stacking improved your win rate in a 470 person field. And the way I kind of looked at this stuff was in taking all the teams that made the playoffs in Best Ball Mania 4, rather than just looking at how they performed in the individual playoff weeks, I pretended like any of the 17 weeks could have been a finals week, a quarterfinals week, a semifinals week. So I just looked at like the cutoff of like week 3, the top 1 out of 470th score, teams that were above that threshold were credited with like a win. And that's sort of how I did that analysis. And the game stacking really goes from a little bit beneficial in a semifinals field, which is 16 people, a quarterfinals field, which is 10 people, to like really increasing your odds in a finals field, which is 470 people.
Mike, do you want to you want me to give you an idea for just a very sick and perverted exercise? You do a Twitter string showing which users would have won BBM3 had their specific week been week 17 instead.
From all the playoff teams?
Yeah.
That would be you would have to be sick enough to know what your tournament entry ID and the underdog data is.
Okay.
I guess you'd know what you'd know by the roster.
Dude, if you know your tournament ID, that is so sick.
I think I know Pat's tournament entry ID. But I actually wanted to like part 4 is going to be like, we throw this all in a machine learning model, all of it, and like come up with an expected value of every team that was drafted last year, which I think is interesting, like rank those. And I really wish the username was in there, because then you could look at like all of Pat's teams and see like how many were EV, like what was the most EV. But
that'd be a good burn if like I only drafted one good EV team and it was the one who won.
We're tweaking the model, but the initial run that Sam, one of the data scientists we just hired did, was your team was like in the 82nd percentile, which is like really good. The team that you drafted that ended up winning the whole thing. And it's your team. Like, it's fun that your team won in like a bunch of ways, but in a nerdy spreadsheet version way, it like really it meshes really well with the article, because you did
happy to help
a lot of the boxes. But then like you also had some, like when I come out with part 3, like some of your positional allocation stuff in isolation doesn't mesh with like the absolute optimal way to play. But that makes it a good counterexample of like, it's more important like how all these pieces work together versus doing like every little thing like optimally.
Because you talk in the first article about the stacking, and I really enjoyed how you talk about like my team had Tom Brady to Chris Godwin to DJ Moore. It didn't have Mike Evans, which was the big piece from that game, but Godwin and DJ Moore were pretty big. And then I had George Kittle and Hunter Renfrow, which was a mini correlation that didn't really work, even though Kittle hit my final lineup. I didn't really need him. I had a Patriots Miami game stack which I got a couple pieces from, but you were like, yeah, but was the correlation why you got pieces from this? Like that might not, some players went off. It's not clear the correlation helped there. And then I had a Daniel Jones to Saquon Barkley and Wan'Dale Robinson, who was injured. Jones had an awesome game, but that almost like destroyed Barkley's chances of having a good game. And then Daniel Jones didn't make my lineup. So I had a lot of correlation in there, but it was really only one piece of correlation that went off. But that one piece like won me the thing. So it's like this, it's a gray area. Like it helped. It didn't necessarily like completely, it's not like a slam dunk that like, oh, you have to do this. But at the same time, the way I look at it as someone who bought into this idea is like, yeah, not all of it worked, but the stuff that did work won me the tournament. So I'm into it. But, you know, I got lucky that stuff worked.
Yeah, that's to some extent the point, though, is like if you're making 3 stacks, you just need one of the 3 to go off on a week. And like your odds of one of your stacks going off and then having the correlated pieces correct just increase by the more stacks that you have, which, you know, sounds obvious, but you're not gonna see winning lineups where it's like all 3 stacks went off and it's like, oh, clearly you had to game stack. You know, it's more that. I also didn't, for the playoff stuff, I didn't include quarterback, running back as a team stack for kind of that reason, where like they're positively correlated over the course of a season. They're even positively correlated in a single game, but at like the real high ceiling levels, I think most quarterback and running backs probably aren't like great for winning a really large field. So I didn't include those as a team stack.
Yeah, that's what I thought was interesting too, looking at Pat's lineup and then King, who won the regular season prize. Both of them had quarterback to running back stacks. Pat had Dimes and Saquon, and King had Jalen Hurts and Miles Sanders. One question I wanted to ask you as you go through these things, and I don't believe this is one part of your series, but I'm curious how you think about exposures falling into this, you know, because a lot of what we're talking about is creating good lineups and in pulling these levers, these various structural strategies, stacking them together to get a really high expected value to a team. Like, where does exposures play into that for you? Because a lot of the conversation when, you know, people love to post their exposures. I have 40% this guy, I'm overweight the field there, but it ultimately doesn't matter if you're not combining those with these other pillars.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the exposure stuff is, to a large degree, it's personal preference, like how you want to play it. You know, I don't think having a very diversified portfolio versus a very concentrated portfolio, one's better than the other. My preference is more for a diversified portfolio because I think like my edge is more in this structural stuff. So there's definitely an edge in player level takes. Like I know we focus on it. So like, I think you want to mix that in, but I'd rather focus on the structural stuff, and then you kind of can get natural diversity. Like last year, I was not as into the game stacking as you guys were, and looking back on the data, you guys were more correct on that than I was. But I kind of lucked into, and I didn't draft a ton of teams last year. I drafted like 10 or 12 teams, but I game stacked most of my stuff because it was kind of like, why not? You know what I mean? Like that gives you a chance to diversify your portfolio to begin with. And then you grab the correlation, and it's sort of like how it played out, right? It's like, if I'm getting guys at good value who are correlated, even if I'm skeptical that correlation matters much in the way that this contest works, I'm free rolling, mattering. And it did end up mattering. So I'm definitely more on the diversified portfolio side of things, but you know, if you can figure out a way to make things work structurally and you have some really hard player takes, I don't think that's wrong. It's just, it's hard to see how you're going to make all your teams like positive EV if you're chasing if you're being very extreme with that, right? Because then it's going to become more difficult to stack. It's going to become more difficult to get like ADP value if you're like always way ahead on someone, because you're making sure you draft them. You're going to have to take them ahead of ADP.
I'm very like player takey, but that's also part of the reason that I really enjoy the correlation and the stacking stuff, is that to me, it's a natural diversifier. Is that if I'm trying to make sure that I'm stacking, it's like, God, I want to take this guy again, but I've already set up this thing, so I've got to take the bring back, or I've got to like tack on another piece to this, stack or whatever I'm trying to build. And it gives me a really objective, sharp reason to go against the instinct, which for me is just to sort of like continue betting on the thing that I do think I have an edge on, which is, these player takes. And maybe I've overvalued that edge to an extent, but to me, it gives me a reason to move away from my original instinct of player takes. And then I think ultimately the two kind of help balance each other out, where because I've, used the correlation and the tiebreakers to move away from the player takes at times, it's not that I don't have player takes. It's just that I end up in a better spot in terms of my overall portfolio.
Yeah. One question for you, Mike, because a lot of times the pushback you'll hear is that, hey, good structural strategies and stacking, all of this is just table stakes now. The entire field is doing this. You can't get an edge doing that. When looking at all of this data, did you come away with like a similar feeling, or is a lot of this stuff still underutilized?
I think it's still underutilized. Like, one thing I tried to do, and I don't want it to come off as overly precise because, it's chopped up data from 1 year. It's meant to be descriptive, not predictive, but I try to like back into an expected value based on doing some of these things. And you start getting like the expected value of a team when you enter the contest is like $22 when you consider the rake and whatnot. And some of this structural stuff, just like by itself, not even combined with other things, you can get up to like a $30 expected value just by doing some stacking stuff. Like that's pretty significant. Like, you go from losing your 10% rake to being quite profitable overall just by stacking. So there are a lot of people doing the stacking. The game stacking, what I saw was, I forgot the numbers. I don't have it in the article, but I kind of looked, because I was looking at week 17 game stacks because I assumed there would be more of those than the ones that randomly occurred throughout the season. And I think it was, but like by like 5 percentage points, like
Wow.
it wasn't by like a ton, which again, like some of this stuff just randomly occurs more than you would expect, kind of the game stacking, but also clearly like, it didn't happen at a huge rate that everybody of these playoff teams, like they weren't all set up with week 17 game stack. So I do think, and this is kind of the EV thing, right? This is the EV once you've already made the playoffs, which is why it's so much higher than that number that I originally gave. But if you just assumed randomness, your expected value in the playoffs is like $133. And then if you just look at game stacked quarterbacks, this is kind of how it changes. Now, it's a little bit misleading because you're probably not setting up game stacks for the quarters, then the semis, then the finals. But the finals has the biggest impact anyways. And then also, if you're game stacked 3 quarterbacks in the finals, that means you have to at least be team stacked for the quarters and the semis, right? Because you can't be game stacked without having the team stack, which, persists across all weeks.
Can I ask you a question? Because the next part of this is about the ADP value and how important that is. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is, you wrote this article and you talk about how in the next part of the article, you talk about, if you draft later in the summer, you're going to have a better chance of landing more live players as you enter the playoffs. But if you draft earlier, you're going to have potential to draft more, closing line value. One of the things that I've been trying to think about is like, what about drafting before the NFL schedule drops? Like, how important is this stacking to where, like, because in the first week of the tournament, we're going to get the most ADP value, right? There's going to be stuff that we look back on in that first week where we're like, wow, that guy was going in the 18th round or whatever. That's crazy. But we have no real chance of game stacking week 17 that week. Like, as you've looked at kind of the difference between the stacking value and the closing line value, also the risk of drafting that early, like, do you have a sense of, if it's that great to draft that week, or if it's an edge, or what do you think about that?
I think really early that week, the first couple days, it's worth drafting to get possibly some insane ADP closing line value. But I'd probably quickly shut that off when you factor in the inability to set up your week 17 game stacks, as well as the odds on making live players through, they just get crushed, the earlier you draft. And so that's kind of what I think with that. It's like, yeah, fire off some drafts the first day or two that it comes out, but
like get the best of the closing line value juice.
Yeah, do fast drafts only probably that week. First couple of days when the ADP is in shambles and the pre-draft rankings, like Sky Moore last year was like, I think they had him like in the 200s or something.
It's still a value, Pete. It was still a value in the 200s.
Well, he just sticks out to me as someone where it's like, this is a guy that, probably going to get steamed at some point, and I mean, you could have taken him in the double-digit rounds. It's like, whether it worked out or not, you got huge closing line value, right? And we know that statistically, closing line value is huge. So, but I probably won't draft a ton of teams early. I'll draft most of them, I think, like mid-July to mid-August. To me, looked like the sweet spot to draft.
Maybe starting on like July 18th or something.
July 18th is probably a good day to start.
July 18th, you just want to multi-table just take the day off from work.
Now, what do you think about this? Because this is another thing that I've kind of thought about. It's like, okay, let's say July 18th, theoretically, was the very, very best day to draft. You wouldn't start on July 18th. You wouldn't draft your first team on July 18th. You'd want to be firing all cylinders on July 18th. You'd want to be hitting your peak as a drafter on July 18th. So that's like another thing to think about, right? It's like, I've got to make sure I have a complete knowledge of the player pool, that I understand. Oh, this guy just went, that means I need to start lining up, this other player, and have like all of that kind of learned knowledge feeling like an instinct by the time you're actually. So you probably want to start drafting a little earlier than is optimal based on these numbers, so that you're feeling like you're in your prime.
Yeah. I mean, does it take that long though? I don't know. I think I
think to me it does. I mean, to me, I probably want at least a dozen drafts under my belt before I felt like I was really firing in my fast draft prime.
Yeah, I did feel a little bit better about doing slow drafts though. I think I'll be in the slow draft game.
Let's go. I get a lot of shit in the slow draft streets. Welcome.
The slow draft stuff I looked at, the fast drafts, you're more likely to have like really good ADP value, but it's not like drastically. Drastically so.
Let me just tell you what's going to happen is that you've now told all the other sharps that slow drafts are cool and fun. So slow drafts are an absolute avoid. I'm pulling a Liam here, and I'm thinking one step ahead of y'all. You don't do slow drafts because Leone's just said slow drafts are good. You definitely avoid slow drafts in 2023.
I honestly, this might be a legit concern. JG saying, but what are we going to do if BBM 4 fills before July 18th? Like the way people are blasting off this year, like this contest could actually fill a lot sooner than people expect.
Yeah, I'm drafting in June. I'm drafting in June for sure. Once the NFL schedule's out, I think I'm good to draft. I like what you were showing about how important it is to have a lot of players, entering the playoffs, that you want a lot of live players. And there's really no way to make sure you have a lot of live players other than just to like draft with more information. I think there's some ways that you can maybe like increase your odds, but nothing's going to increase your odds as much as just having more information. So drafting in May and June is going to hurt you there, but you do have chances of getting better closing line value. And I don't know. I mean, part of it just does feel to me like it's always going to be random. Like you might have that chance to get just an insane closing line value in a June draft that the chances of, on average that type of value didn't exist, but you happen to just hit the nuts, and that's much more likely to happen early than late.
Yeah. So one thing I liked about doing this article though is I felt like doing like the EV exercise at the end helped me to like not fall too far into the trap of like, oh, this might not be great overall, but when it does work, it really works sort of thing, because like that's accounted for in the EV. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Like what? So, and that was the other thing that was really interesting to me with the ADP value stuff. There's definitely some flaws because we're looking at closing line ADP value and like how much of that is controllable. And that's one of the follow-ups I'm going to do is we're like kind of recalculating the ADP ourselves at like the time of draft to kind of redo that analysis with the ADP value at the time of the draft. But Liam's absolutely wrong on that, by the way.
I don't know. Is he? What do you think is more stressful to your personal life, slow drafts or fast drafts? You're the expert now.
Oh, it's definitely fast drafts. I can do everything in my life while slow drafting.
Even when you've blasted off 50 slow drafts?
This. Dude, like it's so much easier, Pat, than if I have to carve out an hour. Like I can't carve out an hour. Like that's gonna get me divorced way more.
Not all of us are don't have kids and are multimillionaires, Pat. Some of us have kids.
I didn't know you guys were an hour away from a divorce, so I'm sorry. I didn't know that. Okay, I apologize.
It's always thin ice. Okay. The thing I was feeling back on though is like the relationship to the EV point, like the relationship between advance rate and playoff stuff, I found like really interesting. Where the game, and I kind of found it encouraging that like just playing this contest in general, I feel like more encouraged by like it's still like super mega variant, but the game stacking stuff clearly helps you in the playoffs more than I thought. But then when I look at the importance of advancing out of the regular season and the impact on the EV, like that's pretty huge too. Like it's like a 40% increase in your finals win rate is equivalent to like a 10% increase in your season long advance rate. And that's kind of like when we talk DFS, like product ownership, right? Like when you start multiplying like the odds of having made it to like the different stages to begin with, increasing your odds of just getting to the playoffs is like super important too. Now those things aren't like necessarily in contrast with one another, but I found that.
Well, have you ever been on Twitter.com?
Well, Leone, one thing I want to ask you about this, and kind of looking at some of the EV stuff and the benefits of stacking 3 different quarterbacks with pass catchers. I would imagine that people could potentially misinterpret this in a way where they're forcing 3 quarterback builds, even if they've already devoted some decent capital to the quarterback position, because they say, hey, I got to get that 3rd stack. That's going to make me more, positive EV. Where do you think the tipping point is for going to get that 3rd quarterback? Because that stack opens up a lot of possibilities, but also knowing, hey, you got 2, elite quarterbacks early. You need to stop devoting capital to the position.
Yeah. So that's where I do wonder if there's the one picture is like a little misleading where like 3 game stacked QBs looks like the absolute best. I'm not sure exactly
Here
where
it is.
Yeah. So the reason that's a little misleading is because the 2 game stacked QBs can also include 3 QB teams that only had 2 game stacked QBs. If you scroll down a little bit to like the EV chart, like when you break it up, like 2 QBs rostered and 2 QBs game stacked is better than 3 QBs rostered and 3 QBs game stacked. And then when I do my part 3 that's coming out, any way you dice it, like 2 quarterbacks is better than 3 playoff win rates and regular season advance rates. The only thing I think that's missing that could be good for 3 quarterbacks is, and that I did not replicate, was the 3 consecutive playoff weeks. I kind of looked at everything in isolation, and I do wonder if there's something with like the odds of 3 weeks in a row of like having a 3rd guy that could randomly get you over the hump. And anecdotally, we've all kind of experienced that. So, but I think at the end of the day, it's like everything we talk about, like you just got to feel out the draft. If you got 2 elite quarterbacks early, you should not be grabbing a 3rd just so you can make a game stack. But
where do you think the line is? Like, because at a certain point, if you don't take that 3rd quarterback, you're not going to advance. And that's where I ended up. If I didn't take Daniel Jones, I wouldn't have advanced my team even to the playoff rounds. But at the same time, like if you're going into a draft thinking, oh, I'm going to build 3 quarterbacks with 3 game stacks, you're almost certainly giving away expected value, because 2 quarterbacks has just been such a stronger way to build these teams. There's a lot of best ball data that shows 2 quarterbacks is a stronger build than 3 quarterbacks. So I guess like, where are you thinking about like, okay, my first quarterback came in, round 7 or round 8 or round 9. My second quarterback came. Like, do you have any thoughts on when it's time to pivot to a 3 quarterback build?
Yeah, I mean, what was interesting is in the part that's coming out when I broke up by like the draft capital spent at the quarterback position, even when you weren't spending a lot of capital at the position, like 2 was kind of better than 3. But I do think like, so your team, for example, is really good kind of example of where you took Tom Brady, then Tua, and you didn't spend a lot of draft capital on either of those players. You got Brady at pick 90, Tua at pick 138, and then you got Daniel Jones at 162. So you got all 3 of those players ahead of ADP. In the aggregate, you got ADP value on all 3 of those players. And then also, I'm guessing you liked those players to an extent. I know by like ETR's rankings, like you got positional ADP.
I think Brady was the one I liked the least. I checked that I was even on Daniel Jones. I had 8% of him. I liked Tua. I don't think I had a ton of Brady, but I had a lot of Rashad White. So my guess is that I was sort of like, I'll build the other side of this. And I went with a Brady for that.
That's my point is like, so you were probably with a tweener, you were kind of one of those on the line drafts, right? With like Brady and Tua, you probably could have gone either way. But I think because you got ADP value positionally on all 3 of them individual or collectively, you got ADP value on 3. And then you also got like by ETR's rankings, like we had Brady as QB9. He was QB10 by ADP. We had Tua as QB16. He was QB17 by ADP. We had Daniel Jones as QB19. He was QB21 by ADP. Like those are small value increments on top of the closing line ADP value you already got. So I guess my point is like, you got to feel it out. Like if you're getting players that you like at value, you're going to be able to mess with the structure a little bit. I think your structure was probably like right on the line of like if you should go 2 versus 3. And you also had with Tua and Brady in particular, like 2 kind of statue quarterbacks.
Right.
Like you get the rushing upside with dimes, you get the bigger built out stacks with the statue quarterbacks. I thought it made a lot of sense. It'll be interesting to see what happens this year because I do think the 3 QB stuff should, in theory, pull a little bit closer to 2 QB teams if elite quarterbacks are going off earlier and earlier, unless it pushes up like all the quarterbacks up the draft board. Then it's like,
which it kind of is.
One thing I've been thinking about a lot, and it was triggered when Osimo kind of first wrote his article looking at some of his sims for the positive, reasons to take 3 quarterbacks. And it is this idea of when you show up to the finals, specifically week 17, there's the self-selection bias to the rosters where the league winner players are there. There were a ton of teams that showed up with Jalen Hurts. And the same thing when there's the league winning running back, it was like 2 years ago on Liam's team, that Jonathan Taylor, everyone had JT, everyone had Mark Andrews. And then thinking like, how do you get the most bang for your buck uniqueness getting there? And I do think it is with that 3rd QB, because you can make the same thing for 7, 8 running back builds with 0 RB, where it's like, I have all these chances for one of these low advance rate guys to go off. But when you have that 3rd QB that's stacked, you're getting the double whammy. You're also getting another unique piece like Pat did, even unstacked, with the Tyquan Thornton and the Jacoby Myers guys showing up. And so that's the only thing I'm thinking about of why I really like the idea of the 3 quarterback builds, is just what it does for you from a uniqueness perspective when you get to the finals.
And Brady was that for me. And the interesting thing is that Brady was the guy that I snuck in, and he was the first guy that I drafted. But the Tua gets hurt. If Tua didn't get hurt, maybe he would have been pretty popular in the final round. But he obviously didn't even play in week 17. And so Daniel Jones kind of helped me get there. Had a big enough week where he would have hit my lineup if Brady doesn't rush in a touchdown right at the end. But Tom Brady was not the guy you needed at any point in the 2022 season before week 17.
Well, that's what's crazy about your entire roster. Like, Pat, you don't have, and this was kind of like Bime for a Nice team a couple years ago, where we didn't have like a single league winner on that team. Like, you didn't have, Ramondre was probably the closest you had to a league winning pick.
Ramondre was the league winner. Yeah. And then George Kittle was 15 and 16. And Eckler. I mean, Eckler wasn't viewed as the league winner because Justin Jefferson had that good of a season, but Austin Eckler had an incredible season.
But yeah, Herzig's team that won a couple of years ago, granted the contest was way smaller then, didn't have like it had a bunch of gross players. And that's where I do think though, like if you just keep drafting teams with smart structures, like that's kind of why I'm on the diversified portfolio a little bit more. Like you draft a bunch of really smart teams, you advance like way more than you should, like your odds of just running into something lucky just like kind of increase. But I do think, Pete, your point with the 3 quarterbacks, it's like if you're unsure, like I think that's enough to tip you to like, okay, if you don't draft an elite quarterback, maybe you should draft 3. Like there's these other reasons that we haven't fully quantified that could definitely be, pretty impactful and increasing your EV.
And I've been using it now because I am in a million big board slow drafts. I've been using that as a tiebreaker because I have found, I don't know if you guys have felt this with the big board drafts, but having those 2 extra slots, I do almost always feel like I have a luxury pick. Do I want that 3rd tight end, the 3rd quarterback, tack on the extra running back, wide receiver? And I will break ties in favor of the 3rd quarterback if I have a natural stack pairing there. And I'm like, oh, it's just right there. I'll just take that and have that be my luxury pick. And it has been informed by a lot of this kind of stuff and what we saw play out last year.
I want you to know that I'm about to take Trey Lance in a slow draft.
What pick? What number?
60. What pick is this?
You doing super flex slow drafts?
Okay, I was gonna say that better be super flex.
Oh yeah, that's super. Isn't that all that's going on right now?
Some of us are still in big board slow drafts.
I've had this whole thing with like when you first entered those slow drafts, I couldn't believe it. And then you did the video and I thought it was very funny. And then I realized you were still drafting them and I like felt sick to my stomach and bad for you. And now I'm jealous. Now I'm actually jealous that you still have big board drafts.
I still have 35 big board drafts going. I only have 115 completed.
I'm legitimately jealous you still get to draft big board drafts. That's so amazing.
Well, and you know what, Pat? The other big bonus is my marriage is still completely intact. I'm not an hour away from divorce.
Dude, I feel so much stress when I have slow drafts going. Like I can't. It's like it's in the back of my head, and I can't remember like what
twice a day at the right hour.
12-hour
twice a day. I like panic. I'm like, oh, I forgot to check my slow drafts.
That's a you problem, not a slow draft.
I know it's a me problem. That's why I don't fucking slow draft.
Well, Pat, you have enough time. You can carve out fucking fast drafts whenever you want. Some of us were out spreading mulch in our yard for an hour and a half.
Yeah, that sounds terrible, dude. So. That sounds terrible.
Dude, I do feel like
drafting.
Yeah,
my day, like with like Micah's school schedule, it's a little bit better now that he's like full day kindergarten. But like, if I'm like exercising and doing stuff, like my workday gets shrunk down. Like I can't just take an hour to like.
It was 80 degrees today, dude. It was 80 degrees. Sit in the backyard, sunshine on your face. Draft. That's all you got to do.
Liam, are you trying to call my bluff on me spreading mulch for 90 minutes earlier? Because I might have taken a selfie that I didn't even end up posting just for this very moment when someone didn't think I had my hand in the
dirt. Pull it up.
Right.
You got your fucking Android shit. I'm sure you got some app that can
Yeah, this is if we're gonna see. I was like, yeah, I've not posted this photo. Here you go, fucker. Me doing mulch out in my driveway.
Yes. Oh, Liam, that must hurt. 10 seconds later, he's got the photo.
God, go surf some chaos.
Yeah. God. He's already dead.
Oh, no, he was just talking about being on the clock at slow drafts. But I did just show you a photo of me doing mulch. Man, I will tell you, like, I have now, like, with the, like, basically all the time I'm just doing, like, weighing, how much is my time worth for doing stuff. And the quote I got for spreading mulch was so outrageous that I was like, I just have to do this myself. I just absolutely have to do it. I'm not paying for this.
Can you share?
No, it was way too much money.
I would love to know what mulch goes.
It's like
I kind of want to know if I would.
It was like $1,800 for all the mulch and all the labor, and I was just like, "Are you kidding me?" And I was so disgusted, I didn't even want to shop around. I was like, "Screw this, I'm doing it myself."
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn, dude.
Oh, you just
All
made
right.
Rachel
And you
do it.
had the mulch. That's not with the mulch. That's you bought
No,
the
I
mulch.
had them drop. I had this nursery come and drop it off in my driveway, and I told them, God, okay, if we're doing this, they tell you to put like a trash can where you want the mulch, and so I put it like right by the side, but where I knew I was going to be taking it. And they're like, yeah, I'm just going to dump it in the middle of your driveway. So now I can't even like drive into my driveway. It's a whole ordeal.
God. All right, so and then
Better
part
work
3 of
quick.
this story, you spread the mulch. So, Pete, tell us about how you spread the mulch.
Well, I'm like a fourth of the way done spreading the mulch, and it's going to be a long, arduous process. And this is why I have to slow draft, Pat.
So, do you think it was worth $1,800 now?
I mean, I think right now I still say it's worth doing it myself. Talk to me after the next hour and a half, and I'll probably wave the white
Wait,
flag.
are you mulching after this podcast? You're gonna be
No. But the rest of the week I have to keep finding time to go spread this goddamn mulch. And I got to get it in a wheelbarrow and fucking schlep it all around.
How many hours do you think it'll take you overall?
I think I have like another 4 hours of mulching.
God, just 1,800 doesn't sound bad at all now.
How
I
much?
hate it.
That sounds pretty reasonable.
How much is your time worth?
I did the hourly rate, and I was like, I don't know if I can justify. I mean,
So you're still like
$600 an hour.
$300 an hour, right?
Yeah, so I was like, I mean, goals.
Yeah.
All right, but thank you, Liam, for helping me inadvertently build my hand in the dirt street cred there. I mean, Silva would never.
Honestly, it kind of was an Android sell for me that you were able to pull it up that quick on a PC.
Well, you got the auto upload to Google Photos, and so I was able to share that. I'll show you another cute photo while I have this up. I take April on walks basically every day, and she just passes out. And now I've been having to give her the hat and sunglasses.
God.
April passed out on the walk today.
Wow, dude.
I love it.
That's delightful.
It's so good. And I think people are used to seeing like really little babies in strollers when they're out on walks. And so she's just like kind of bobbing around, and it looks like the Galifianakis baby in The Hangover that's just kind of like in the carrier straight out. It always catches people off guard. All right. Back to best ball. Mulch chasing. All right, Leone, anything else here as we go down from the ADP value? Because I think there's two different ways you can think about ADP value, right? There's like in your given room when a pick falls 10 picks past ADP. And it's basically this draft room isn't acknowledging the market for some reason. And then there's also the closing line value element, which is what we're talking about with Ramondre, or when King got Dameon Pierce like 75 picks ahead of where he closed. So do you make any distinctions between ADP value relative to like over the course of the summer versus in an individual draft room?
Can you say that again? I want to make sure.
Yeah, sorry. I was saying there's like two types of ADP values you can get. It's like in your draft room, everyone just decides they don't want to take David Montgomery.
Okay. So
yeah.
The analysis I did is purely over the course of the offseason. Like what's the final ADP, the start of the season versus where you got them at in your draft. The follow-up I'm going to do is the other type of ADP value that you're talking about, which is basically like, what's the ADP you're looking at in your draft room versus what you're getting them. Like, so you know your immediate ADP value as soon as the draft ends. And I want to look at that to kind of see the correlation to closing line value and basically just do the same analysis that I did, but for that type of ADP value. I'm sure it's going to be way less impactful. There's going to be way less variance in terms of like how good and how bad your ADP value can get, but I'm definitely interested to see what that spits out.
But I think that's where knowing the player pool really comes in, because there's certain guys that have been rising. Like this year, you look at certain guys that have been rising, and we've done ADP chasing every week. And one of the things that's jumped out to me is like the risers repeat. You know, every Friday it's like this guy's a riser, and then the next Friday he's a riser again, and the faller is a faller again. And so if you don't understand why a certain player is falling to you in a draft, it might be because in a month they're going to be going 2 rounds past where you currently are. And so, yeah, they're a value in that particular draft, but they're actually not a very good closing line value bet. Now, that might also not be the case. It might just be you're in a weird room. And so I think that's where, like, you know, you really have to have a good feel for the player pool. and make a decision on the clock of like, no, this is kind of weird that this guy's here and I'm going to scoop him up. I don't like him, but this is a really good value on him, and I feel confident that I'm actually getting closing line value with this ADP value here.
Yeah, the falling knife aspect. And that's what I was going to say too, and why I was wondering how much even ADP value in your specific draft, how important that is, because one, you'll very rarely see a guy slip more than 10 picks past ADP unless there is like a news-based thing that the ADP hasn't fully reflected yet. So I'm like, yes, I like to woo and get excited when I take a guy, 12 picks past ADP, but am I actually even gaining anything from that?
Yeah, so I hope to have an answer for you in the future. And then that too would give a little bit more clarity on like at what point should I grab my stack, right? Like how much is it worth grabbing a stack ahead of ADP value?
Yeah.
I still kind of lean towards like attempting to build like super teams and getting kind of lucky with your like getting your stack at value. But I definitely lean a little heavier this year than last year of like prioritizing it ahead of the ADP value. But yeah, hopefully you get a better indication of that when we look at the ADP value at the time of the draft, not just the closing line ADP value. I do think like the number of live players stuff is interesting to look at just because like how extreme it is. Like the expected value of the 3 game stacked QBs that we looked at, like once you make the playoffs was $164, which looks like a huge increase over randomness, which is $133. But when you start looking at the number of live, so like that 3 game stack QBs looks good. If you scroll all the way down, I don't know if you can do a find on like number of live players. If you go to that chart though, you can like that gap barely even registers. Now you don't have much control over this at all. If you do number of live players, I think that's, never mind. That's like in the image title. So, but
I'll keep scrolling. Keep going.
Yeah. But basically, it's just kind of astounding at like if you're just healthy.
Oh wow!
If you're just healthy,
I mean, like it's insane. Which is why I think I will forego some of the ADP value early in the summer and draft a little bit later, and kind of try and thread the needle, because if you can increase your odds of getting through healthy players, it's so huge. And I also want to follow up on this, splitting it up a little bit more instead of just doing it by like the total number of players on the roster, like try and tease out the impact of like, obviously if you have 15 live players, that means the odds of one of your important players early getting hurt is just way less because there's only 3 dead players on the roster. So like how much of it is it just your early players getting hurt or not versus like back end players contributing in some way? But this is just based on like anyone who scored above 0 in that given week was considered a live player. Like they could have scored 1 point, they were considered a live player. So I want to tease it out a little bit more, but it's insane. Like if you, Pat, your team was at 15 live players, like your EV like almost doubled on that basis alone, like heading into the playoffs.
Well, and that's what's so crazy too, is because if you really think about it, the number of live players and the like closing line value, those are almost on opposite values of the spectrum on how you would achieve those, right? You draft earlier to get really good closing line value. You draft super, super late to have more live players because you have the most information and you're able to, sift through all the injuries that, have happened in the preseason. So that's why Pat's lineup is so unique, because he was able to accomplish both those things, which is also hilarious that he drafted almost like perfectly in the middle of the summer.
Yeah, if you scroll down, there's an interesting kind of chart that like starts to tease out a little bit of the like when to draft, like number of live players, and you can see like May and June are just like tough. Like like 10% of drafts in May were 10% of teams were drafted in May, but only 5% of teams that enter the playoffs with 18 live players were from May. So it was like cut in half your odds of making it to the playoffs with 18 live players. And then, so you see July, August is like a pretty nice cutoff there. And then when we do kind of the same type of look by ADP value, like once you hit August, September, it's like hard to get like a really high end ADP value team. It's just you're not going to get, there's just less time to get closing line ADP value. So,
and you could also say though that like it tracks with, one of the things we always say, right, is the earlier you draft, the more landmines you're likely to step on, but the better chance you have at making a super team. And when you say better chance at making a super team, I think everyone acknowledges that's a really thin chance. So if you're saying, hey, 5% chance here of a team where you're able to create a healthy team that also got some good closing line value, maybe that risk reward still is there.
Yeah, it might be. I kind of think though, if when you combine it though, it just the answers kind of point to July, early August, where it's like that's your best chance of getting both.
But I will say that, last year the barbell strategy was really in vogue. And so people felt like a lot of sharp drafters were like, I'm drafting in August or I'm drafting in May and June. And so like me and Pete were like, we have a lot of shit to do. So we're going to be drafting the whole summer. So, I kind of spread mine out. I drafted more, kind of barbell-y, but I kind of actually consider July early, like before training camp starts. I still think is an early draft. So I kind of, what I took off was maybe like the very end of July and like early August when like training camp was kind of like flying and lots of information was coming in, and I kind of waited until I had like actual information. But my point is, I felt like in those, July 18th, like around that date drafts, a lot of people weren't drafting. A lot of people who are really strong competition weren't drafting. And now I wonder if like maybe that turns into June. Like maybe the ADP value this year is stronger in June than it would have been because, the takeaway from here is, man, we really got to draft in July. July is the prime month.
And if you scroll down, you can see the same kind of charts, which is draft month and ADP value. And you like all these have to net to zero, because if bucket one, which is the best ADP value, that's all the way on the left, that's overrepresented, it's got to be underrepresented somewhere else. So that's kind of why you see the graphs the shape that they are, because it has to net out at zero in some way. Like no matter where you draft, like the ADP value buckets have to like even out. So it's just a matter of like where the over or under representation is. And you see in May, June, that in May in particular, like you get really big swings. There's some really bad teams, which is fine because you're just accepting L's. Like you have to be able to take your L when you're drafting, and you get some really good teams. But the same shape kind of applies to July as it does to May, which is why I'm kind of zoned in. I'm a little skeptical that is impacted where there were just so many barbell drafters that July was that much softer than like other months. But, and you see,
I don't think it was that much softer, but I don't think it hurt. And I guess I'm wondering if Leone says July is the month to draft, I don't think that's going to help July.
I don't think people are listening to me to the extent that you think.
Yeah, you don't think maybe DFS is the hardest it's ever been and shit's ruined?
Okay, fair enough. But as far as like the people that said they were barbelling are generally people who are like coming up with their own ideas, and I don't think they're gonna be changing their ideas.
Question about the live player stuff, and I think Josh was kind of hinting at this with one of his questions in the chat. Was there any more granular data on the live player stuff, maybe from a positional level? I guess I'm trying to wonder, are there any, if you were to adjust your strategies earlier in the offseason to try to sidestep more of the live players, would there be a structure or a thing you would do? I mean, intuitively, I want to say zero RB makes a ton more sense early on if you're trying to have more live players. But did you see anything else in the data?
I did not. I think those are good questions. I was actually thinking zero RB is better for like the ADP closing line value. I don't know if it's better for number of live players.
I don't actually think it's better for number of live players. Because even in like when zero RB hits, you're kind of like, I'm writing off like a few running backs,
right?
Because I'm basically like, I'm gonna have, this one running back contribute 3 weeks, and then he's gonna get hurt, and then I'm gonna have this other running back kind of chip in. Like in zero running back, you're almost, I mean, you'd be absolutely smashing to have 16 live players entering the playoffs of the zero running back team generally, because you've drafted so many running backs.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. I would almost say like, this is just me purely speculating, but 3 QB teams earlier make more sense to me, where the odds of your later round skill player being on the roster in any way, shape, or form is less. So you might like, why not take the third quarterback or the third tight end or something? I probably want to. I don't know. It's tough.
Rookies, I think, are probably something to think, because one thing to think about what we're talking about is we're not talking about, players who are going to score a ton of points. Like if you advance and you have a rookie, and that rookie is probably more likely than a veteran to be live for you in the playoffs going forward, right? Like it doesn't matter that Trey McBride didn't do anything to start the year. If he helps you out in the playoffs, it's a massive win. So I do think rookies would be one way to sort of like lean in the late rounds. I also think as the draft goes on, like as the season goes on, maybe to lean away from 3 quarterback. I like your idea of going 3 quarterback builds early, but to me, we've talked about how much more powerful 2 quarterback builds are in general, but quarterbacks with low job security in the late rounds just seem like a quick way to hurt yourself in a number of different ways. We already know that it's not the best build to tackle on a third. And now you're looking at a guy, you're like, I need this guy to advance. But if you don't end up needing that guy to advance, and then he's a dead player for you because he got benched,
yeah,
it seems like that absolutely crushes your EV.
Yeah, I think that's a really sharp point about the third quarterback. Like, it's just a bad bet, right? Like it's for to take a risky to play third quarterback, I think is
Yes.
likely.
Like a Marcus Mariota last year, right? Like Marcus Mariota, he's a rushing guy, Well, guess what? He's going to get benched. We know he's going to get benched. They drafted this guy Ritter. Like we all think he sucks, but he's going to end up playing by the end of the year. It was a pretty easy bet. And that's exactly what happened. I just think that kind of, that play as we get, especially as we get deeper into the season and we feel more confident that that's going to happen, then it's like your payoff is potentially nothing, because those types of quarterbacks are probably not needed for you to advance anyway. They're very unlikely to add a spike week. And then if they're a 0 for you entering the playoffs based on these charts, it's like a huge deal. It really hurts your chances. So, I mean, I don't want to crap on Sam Howell any more than I already have, but that's the type of that's the type of play that I think is potentially really bad.
One thing that I found interesting that's going to be in part 3, but I bucketed the quarterbacks by draft capital spent and regular season advance rates. If you were, I bucketed them into like 5 buckets. So like bucket 1 means you spent top 20 percentile draft capital on quarterback. Buckets 1 and 3 had plus EV advance rates. Bucket 2 was like by far the best, which would have been like you're taking an elite quarterback, but like you're not taking like 2 super early. You're spending, but like not a crazy amount on quarterback. And all this stuff, of course, is shaped by like, Jalen Hurts was like not the most expensive quarterback and he had huge advance rates. So you have to like keep that in mind. But it was really impactful on regular season advance rates. If you were in buckets 4 and 5, your advance rates were like 13-ish percent, 13 to 14%, which is like pretty bad when your average advance rates like 16.7%. But then when it came to the playoffs, it didn't really make a difference. And this was so counterintuitive to the arguments I myself was making last year, which was basically like, 3 might help you get there, but for that single week upside, you're going to need, the elite quarterback who goes off. For whatever reason, in this analysis that I did, once you made the playoffs, it didn't. Your estimated playoff advance rates for single week upside were kind of unaffected by how much you spent at quarterback, which I thought was interesting. I mean, I'm not saying that like that argument I had last year that didn't hold water isn't valid, because again, like this stuff's going to change. We could run the same season over again and get completely different results and overanalyze them because it's just one season.
And Hurts got hurt, that's probably the fact that
but it is all 17 weeks.
Oh, it is all 17 weeks. Right. Yeah. Good point.
So it was.
Well, one more for you here, Leone. I do expect at least the payout structure for Best Ball Mania 4 to change. And I imagine there's going to be more prize money paid out to regular season top finishers beyond just first place overall. Do you think, getting out in front of that thought, that there's some stuff you can do drafting wise, looking at, because you did segment it by regular season advance rate stuff. Do you think there's some stuff, there are specific levers people can pull if they're trying to optimize for 1 through 14 as opposed to the playoff weeks?
I mean, if you really wanted to like get your schedule opponents down, if you could find like common opponents among your quarterbacks to get multiple game stacks throughout the regular season and thus increase your weekly upside, which we know increases weekly upside, like that'd be something that you could do. Other than that, I'd have to look a little bit closer to see, because I looked at the advance rates for the regular season, but I didn't look at like the top 1% scores for the regular season, which I've done in the past, and I'm sure some of the data would be changed for that.
What I'm hearing is if there's any divisional matchups in week 17, to hammer those, because you get that sweet regular season potential.
Yeah, you get the playoff stack with the regular season stacking.
You get to double dip.
But like if you took like three quarterbacks in the same division or something, right? Like you'd have all these common opponents that you could take in games. Like you could just play the AFC West, right?
Yeah,
like,
maybe not the AFC West though. That didn't work.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking there's like they're all rosterable quarterbacks, right? Like, but yeah, debatable. But the other thing, I guess, like just I don't know, the risk reward stuff's probably a little bit different. Some of my pushback still on the risk reward stuff in the playoffs is like there's so much randomness once we get to the playoffs in 3 consecutive weeks that like you want to optimize your teams for the playoffs, but it's still like super random. But like, I don't know, I might do more risk reward stuff of just getting like the absolute insane team in the regular season, right? Because like the playoffs, you don't need to have the best team, right? Like,
yeah,
you just gotta, there's a lot of stuff with the unique players that
like
Levitan
roasted my team. We get it.
But like you had unique players in week 17, you had the 3 quarterback build that got there. Like there's just things that happen, right? Like you even said like this team wouldn't have advanced if it was in a different pod, right? Like,
well, I don't know. It wouldn't have advanced. Well, it probably wouldn't have advanced in a different pod, but it wouldn't have advanced without Austin Eckler's second touchdown. He barely advanced out of the.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were like, but I just mean like there's randomness. Whereas like if you're winning the regular season prizes, like you've had the best team over 14 weeks, right? There's obviously a bunch of randomness in getting the best team. Like, don't get me wrong, but like the best team is winning.
Well,
the regular season prize. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. There's just like a little different mindset for me there.
But yeah, to me, I guess looking at your data in like the benefits of the 3 quarterback and the 3 different stacks you can get that help you through the playoff gauntlet, to me, that would be diminished, and locking up really good closing line value would be even more important for weeks 1 through 14, where you're essentially getting the league winners that move up massively. So it would, I think, maybe skew things toward drafting earlier. Like if you were out, because you'd have a much better chance at that.
That's where I was rambly kind of going with my, like, I'd be more into like the high risk, high reward strategies with that, which is exactly what you said. Like taking more chances at just getting obscene closing line value by drafting early and hoping to get lucky with the number of live players.
Yeah.
But it is crazy. Like then going back to like just the playoff expected value, it is crazy. Like, again, like how much your regular season advance rate influences the overall team's expected value, which is why I'm like a little bit less willing to take those super big swings on the ADP closing line value. And I care more about the live players because, well, one, we know live players matters a ton in the playoffs, but like just making it to the playoffs in and of itself is like a pretty big W.
Yeah, and I think that to the extent that you can make sure you're increasing your odds of making the playoffs without sacrificing your week 17, because like, okay, if I can draft a little later and that really increases my odds of making the playoffs, awesome. But I still think you want to be building teams that are meant to take down week 17, right? So it's kind of
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very clear that you can optimize for the playoffs and that optimization has merit.
Yeah. Well,
was there anything else? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Pat.
Well, I mean, I think we've done about an hour and 20 minutes of lead now, and people understand what the article is. So tell us why people are spending too much capital at running back.
I don't know. I two things. I'd say one, like I already kind of said, when you chop up just 1 year data, it's different. Like the hyper fragile teams did kind of good the previous 2 years, but we already hit on it. But like the closing line value that you get, which is the same. The reason you get closing line value in the offseason is the same theory of why you play zero RB throughout the regular season too, which is that like you can potentially get these. It's the anti-fragile. Like you can get these big, huge boosts in value. And we saw that happen last year. I think people are over investing in running back to begin with, like even if running back and wide receiver were equal. But yeah, some of it's like uncertain. I looked into it by time of year though, because one of my theories was like, okay, like earlier in the year, like later in the year, closer to the season, the hyper fragile teams probably did better, and like spending more capital at running back probably did better closer to the season. This makes sense because like early in the season, there's volatility and you get a ton of closing line, but you can get a ton of closing line value. So it makes more sense to go zero RB earlier. But like, honestly, the data did not show that at all. The teams that were drafted in September actually performed relatively worse than the teams drafted in July in terms of capital spent at running back.
What do you mean? The teams
so
the running backs that spent, the teams that spent early picks on running backs in September did worse than the teams drafted in July?
Yeah, so the teams that spent yeah, so in July, just for example, if you took 5 running backs on your roster and you were in the 4th out of 5 buckets in spending at running back, your advance rate in July was 18.3%. Your advance rate in September was 19.9%. If you took 4 running backs only and were in the 2nd bucket,
so seconds more spent.
Seconds more spent, so it's like second highest.
Okay.
Out of 5 buckets. So it's like the 20th to 40th percentile, top 20th to 40th percentile of RB spending. Your advance rate in July was 16.1%, and in September it was 13.4%. So it was worse in September. So that didn't really hold true that it was a time of year thing.
Pete, Sean's always said he likes drafting in September better than July. I never understood why. But now maybe
But yeah, I did look at, if you look at like the ratio of wide receiver spending to running back spending too, the larger the ratio in favor of wide receiver, the better the advance rates were. So even as a ratio. So again, it's just one season of data, but yeah, running back did not serve well last year. And again, whenever you're building a team like Pat, like your team comes together so well. And I think like that's a good reminder that like, this doesn't mean you should just go out and build like only wide receiver.
What bucket was my team in?
Your bucket was in bucket 3. You had 5 running backs total, and you were in the 3rd bucket of running back spending.
And I went running back, and was still not in one of the top 2 buckets. So it's not like you can't draft running backs early. It's just keep in mind.
Yeah. So you had Eckler at 7, Barkley at 18, Mondre at 114, Mostert at 186, and Michelle at 199. And like, there's just examples like there's this 7 RB team, like these 7 RB teams that didn't spend a lot at running back did well, but like there's one that has CMC on it. That's like 7 RBs in bucket 4. Like it's hard to spend the 2nd overall pick on CMC and to draft 6 other running backs and be in bucket 4, right? That means you're not spending a lot, but like, so you can still take running backs early. That was CMC at 2, Kenneth Walker 95, Kareem Hunt 98, Henderson 122, Algier 146, Mostert 191, and Jeff Wilson 215.
That's like a quintessential anchor RB build when you get like a top 2 or 3.
You're pushing it though. I mean, I like it as an anchor RB build, but you pushed it.
There's also there's this 7 running back
Yeah,
team that, because I gave examples so people could kind of like visualize, but like there's a 7 running back team that was bucket 5, so the lowest amount of running back spending, that took Brees Hall at 54 and ETN at 67. So they got huge closing line value on those two guys, but like you can still get running backs. That just goes to show you like how much people are spending for that to be like the lowest 20th percentile. Like other people are spending, right? Like people are just spending, too much. Like one of the 5 RB teams that's in bucket 1 of spending is like Mixon at 13, Zeke at 36, Dylan at 60, Edmonds at 85, Herbert at 156. So you do kind of have to be pretty binary. Like you're either waiting on running back and taking some in this, like you take a bunch in the 60s, or you're taking 1 or 2 early and then waiting a really long time.
Yeah.
Because go back to that CMC one. What was the next pick he took a running back at?
Kenneth Walker at 95.
Yeah,
he took Walker and Hunt.
So this is King's team that won first place. I mean, he took Sanders at 87, and then he was in that same pocket with his 0 RB picks: Walker 111, White 130, Pierce 135. So I don't feel like that anchor RB build was pushing it that much, right?
Well, this
I guess it wasn't.
This is really low RB spending. This team. I mean, this is this is for sure a bucket 5 team with only 6 RBs.
Yeah.
But it also helps. I mean, it helps though when you get 75 spots of ADP value on Damian Pierce.
Yeah, it does help. I also think like this is where the breakdown occurs with like we talk about things like how many overall running back picks you spent. Did you spend 6 or 7? Did you spend 5 or 8, whatever, at wide receiver? It's like how much capital did you spend? It's like we should almost like do the cutoff after like round 14 or something and like not even talk about what happened after that, because like those are essentially like $1 auction picks at that point, or $2 at most. So like this like concept that you have here of the bucketing of the capital spent. I wish there was a way to do this on the fly to like figure out how much we'd spent at the running back position. I mean, I guess like Spike Week work on it, but
yeah,
there's like got to be, because that's really the conversation that we need to be having is how much capital have you spent? I went running back, and I'm in the 3rd bucket. You go CMC 2, you're in, what was he in the 4th or 5th bucket? Like
4th bucket. Yeah. And
bucket.
He drafted 7 total. So like,
yeah,
if you're drafting running backs, it obviously like you're spending more capital. Just
that's the thing where if you told me the headline guy took CMC number 2, drafted 7 running backs, I'd be like, what a donkey.
Yeah.
He's in bucket 4. He played it smart, right? So there's a lot of different ways to do this.
Yeah, and the 7 running back teams as a whole did really bad, but the ones that managed to curtail their spending did really well. And it was kind of interesting too that like when you looked at total running backs rostered, people who rostered 3 running backs, they underutilized capital at running back. Like their average running back draft, these numbers won't mean anything to you other than that they're different from each other. But the average running back capital spent, if you only drafted 3, was 238. If you drafted 7, or if you drafted 8 running backs, the average capital spent was like 309. But like 4 through 7, the field was kind of sharp. Like it's like 270, like across the board. So the field did overall kind of like make mental adjustments for draft capital spent in the aggregate. But yeah, when you break it down by both the bucket and the number of running backs rostered, you definitely see where more running backs and less capital, basically 0 RB did really well. I'm careful to like not say 0 RB too much though, because as we've seen, like
please don't.
Some of these have like early running backs in them, right? Like it's
people got mad about the modified 0 running back thing, but I think this is what we were trying to say, right? Don't spend a ton of fucking draft capital at running back.
Okay, Leone, here's one for you. Emerging from this data deep dive, how do you handle, in knowing some of these things, how do you handle a wide receiver avalanche? How do you handle a ship chasing piss room where the best value at every pick is by far running back?
So I've thought about this a lot because
he's been waiting. Just tell me how to win these drafts that I have to stream, buddy.
Asking for a friend.
It's hard, right? Because you can, as we've seen, you can only spend so much capital at running back. So like
Right.
there's every pick you take at running back is a lot of opportunity cost, because that means you can't take another running back with another pick, because you just start hitting the ceiling of capital that you should spend at the position.
Yeah.
I think the best way to do it is, it kind of depends like when you eye the avalanche. I mean, for you kind of know it's coming from like pick one.
Pete's always got the best sense of the avalanche. Sometimes I'm like, we could take a running back. Pete's like, no, we cannot.
I just love that I have Leone seriously saying things like it depends on when you first catch wind of an avalanche.
Well, but it is really interesting, because like if you get a super running back heavy room, you can just like dominate that room, right? Like it's very easy. You get a super wide receiver heavy room, whether it's right or wrong, it's still difficult to navigate, right?
Well, this is actually why I think it's maybe right, is that like you as a group, it's harder to be beaten. Like if everyone's taking the wide receivers,
that's what matters too. It depends how many. If like a few people are taking wide receivers way too early, I think it's still like kind of easy to navigate.
Those people are vulnerable. But if everyone's snapping up the wide receivers, the people who don't follow suit end up being the vulnerable ones.
Yeah, I think it's such a vague answer, but it's like I think you want to get 1 or 2 running back values in the first 10 rounds that people are refusing to take, that are really good.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to spend less on wide receiver than the group, but like you're still able to get to where you need to get. And then you can also like reconfigure the draft capital spent to like ADP to like ADP capital spent, right? Which is kind of what you would have to do at wide receiver to know if you spent enough at wide receiver, because the draft capital would tell you you've spent enough, but like the ADP capital would obviously be way lower because all the wide receivers are getting pushed up the board.
Right.
So it's like a little bit weird, but no, those rooms are tough, because like you go running back because it's a great value. Then it's like you're taking really shitty wide receivers in round 8, and you're passing on really good running back values in round 8, because you literally cannot take a running back anymore. So the zag while everyone zigs is like not super straightforward.
It's take a couple detours while everyone is zigging.
Yeah, because it becomes tough in a room where wide receivers are going off the board quickly, especially if people are building with the idea that they don't want to spend a ton of draft capital at the running back, which is what these rooms are doing. They're not looking to spend a ton of draft capital at the running back. Then what ends up happening as a natural result of that is that there are just it's impossible that there won't be running back values later in the draft, right? Because everyone's scooping up wide receivers and they're avoiding running backs. So if you grab running backs early and you're locked out of those running back values late, the people that are scooping those running back values have better wide receivers than you. So
they're still getting running back
value. Yeah, they're still getting running back value. So they've found a way to get better value than you at both positions. That's
where some of them, like, I think will get. You just hope some of those teams get screwed, right? And like you make it hard on them by like, if you're the first at like 2 running back values in like the first 8 rounds or something, like you're probably still going to be okay. There's some delicacy with timing where like understanding how far you can push it, right? Like if it's crazy wide receiver heavy, you might be able to push it pretty far, but like.
Right. But if Josh Jacobs is there, you got to take him.
I mean, yeah.
All right, Leone, close us out. Who's this year's Josh Jacobs?
Yeah, tell us who we're jumping the shark with this year.
Who is?
I thought it was Mixon, but now the off the field stuff is like.
I like that call, and then it seemed to have changed.
Yeah. It changed, could it be Najee? Kyle Dvorchak was yelling at me about my these ranks haven't launched yet, but my Najee rank tilted him.
It could be. I could see it. I want to get past the NFL draft with Najee, but
so do I. That's part of the reason I have him low to begin with.
Yeah. But one last thing on the wide receiver stuff is like, I do think like people are probably taking too many wide receivers in the wide receiver avalanche room. Like if you're taking
too many overall.
Yeah, like if you're taking wide receivers early, you should probably only be taking like 7 or 8 if you're like really taking them early.
Yeah.
or at least that's how it worked out last year. But that just pivots off running back, right? Like the teams with lots of running backs that didn't spend a lot on running backs did well. So like,
what do you think about the idea of trying to advance as many players to week 15, 16, 17 as possible as it comes to, to how many wide receivers and running backs we have? Because one thing that comes to mind is like, if I go 0 running back and I only need 5 running backs to get there, I'd rather spend my 17th and 18th round picks again on wide receivers, rookie wide receivers, perhaps, maybe not in this year's class, but just let's say generally, to like make sure that I'm maximizing my chances of actually hitting on guys who are going to be active in those final weeks.
That's where it's tough. Where like, and Pete, we talked about when we streamed on his channel the other night, you do get a better chance at like a unique running back who's like projected as an RB1 for the week, the more kind of flyers that you take, just because they're easily dismissible, like not needing them on a week, but then they could become super important with the right injury. So,
but they're also more likely to be dead roster spots as well.
Yeah,
right.
They are. That's where I want to like, again, like kind of parse out the live spots to like end of draft versus early in the draft to like kind of tease out the impact. But I think they're looking at the early ADP, like we're way ahead of positional ADP on Swift.
Okay.
I like Swift.
I'm pretty, I mean, I don't know if that's a fair Jacobs comp, but
it's not a fair Jacobs comp because they hate his guts. They're never going to give him an 80% snap share in his whole life.
Well, guess who played in the Hall of Fame game, and everybody on Twitter said they must really hate Josh Jacobs. They must just hate him so much if he played in the Hall of Fame game.
I wish you were right about Swift on that respect. So, I think you could still smash ADP. I'm not saying that.
My thought with Swift is I think people are undervaluing, like, if he just gets like 6 targets and like 6 carries a game, that like he like won DFS tournaments doing that, as shitty of a workload as it is. Like the high value touches are so important. And then like, just like, I mean, we all think David Montgomery's not good. Other players get hurt. If Swift's super explosive, you got a, different running back coach. Like, I don't know. I feel like his shitty role is already accounted for. And then it's just like all upside.
Gretsch compared him to Eckler. And I think that's a really fun comp.
Yeah,
it'd be very fun comp. And the reason I don't think it can, I think Swift is a good one from an ADP perspective, but it's not good in that Josh Jacobs made us all feel so disgusting when we drafted him. And we all still have an affinity. The one in the chat that is a good one is Dalvin Cook. That feels he's going in around the same.
What about Aaron Jones?
I was going to say Cam Akers. I think it's Cam Akers.
I never feel gross when I select Aaron Jones. I basically always pass on Dalvin Cook.
Do you feel gross taking Cam Akers?
I've taken him. I have like 0 Dalvin Cook. I have like probably I'm even with the field on Akers and Aaron Jones.
Yeah, I mean we are really low on Dalvin. We think there's like a really good chance that he gets cut. If he's in Minnesota right now, the way his ADP's falling, if he stays, he's going to be fine where he is. It's going to be pretty good. But we kind of think he's gone, with the money that Madison got and everything. But I think Akers is a good one.
Akers is a good one.
They cannot draft another running back. Like, they just don't have the resources to
Don't tell the Rams what to do, man. They will do whatever they fucking want.
The running back room's so bad. We kind of saw him. We've seen him multiple times over multiple seasons get like this huge workload, whether he should or not. I don't really care, which was kind of the thing with Jacobs. Like, and like, he's someone that like isn't terrible, right? Like, that's the thing with Jacobs. Like, he was a former 1st round pick. Like Akers, I don't remember where he went exactly, but like he was he was a relatively early pick and someone that like we all liked at one point in time.
Well, he looked great before he tore his Achilles, and that's the other thing. He's got another year off the Achilles injury. Yeah, he looked pretty good down the stretch. I think that's a good one. I recently had a Cup team that I took Akers on, where I was like, I've already made a bet on the Rams, so I might as well just take him.
Yeah. Kamara seems like he's going really late. I mean, I know a lot of that is he's gonna get suspended. We don't know for how long. It still seems like it. I don't know.
Yeah. The other guy, Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the other guy that I literally have not clicked at all is James Conner. And he's a guy
I've clicked
who,
him.
like,
I've clicked
you
him.
have? You've clicked
Yeah.
him?
Yeah, because look, the Cardinals are going to be a disgusting team.
Yeah.
They're going to have some like David Blau or Colt McCoy whenever he's healthy type quarterback back there, and they're going to just be checking down. They're going to be checking down to James Conner, and he's going to be racking up a bunch of bullshit, and he's like a 10th round pick. I often end up in a spot where I'm like, dude, I could really use some nasty ass gross week from James Conner to help get me through. And Jamal Williams goes in the same range. I mean, Connor's a better pick than Jamal Williams. You know, Connor could be doing this at the end of the season too.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Connor thing makes sense. Like, I think we could get one more year of him just getting a bullshit volume, and
that's why I think he might be a really good candidate for the Josh Jacobs.
Yeah, I think he's a great candidate.
I mean,
it's nasty, man. Whenever I take him, I will tell you, I've taken him, and several times after taking him, not once, several times, I've like Googled him to make sure he's still healthy. Like, I've gone to RotoWorld and read blurbs. Like, I'm like, it's felt so gross. Like, why is he here? I think that's the best name we've heard so far.
If these depth charts didn't change going into the season, oh God, I'm going to get flamed for this one, I'm sure. But I would take Connor over Rashad Penny if these depth charts.
I don't
so
think
you just
that's
hate fun, huh? You just hate
their ADPs aren't even that different right now, though, Leone.
No, they're not. Connor's one spot behind Penny, but I'm assuming anyone that watches this show thinks that's wrong.
Well, would prefer Penny. Yeah, they don't.
Lose in the chat for Leone for such controversial thought. I've actually struggled with Penny, and partly because I do, and not that this is some humble brag, but I was hammering him before free agency, and so I've just had sticker shock of like I haven't taken him once, or maybe once or twice.
Really? I'm still taking him.
Yeah,
I'm still taking him. It doesn't feel like that. You know, if he was a 6th round pick, I probably would stop taking. But you know, it's at a point in the draft where there's not really that much left.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't even know if I should say if does Penny have more depth chart risk than Connor? Like,
yes. I mean, Penny has no like money on his contract. Penny could be this year's Rojo, unfortunately, where he just like isn't a part of the team's plans. Like
right.
His contract was
a lot of ways it
embarrassing.
goes wrong for Penny.
Yeah. There's a lot of ways. I mean, one of them is that they just draft anybody in a deep class. Like they're talking.
The upside is still sick. I mean, but
the upside's sick. Yeah, but I mean, there's like rumors of Gibbs and stuff. I mean, that would be pretty disastrous. You know,
where's at what point would you guys take Zeke in a draft?
You know, I'm taking Fournette a fair amount, and if Zeke was going where Fournette was, I would take Zeke there. But Zeke goes like substantially ahead of Fournette.
Yeah,
and I'm like, why? Like Fournette is terrible, but he catches passes, and Zeke doesn't even do that. So I get also terrible, but catches passes like 25 picks later.
Yeah, Fournette's a better bet than Zeke, probably straight up, and then
and you get the ADP value to be. And then the other thing is that Zeke goes ahead of Tank Bigsby and Kendre Miller, who I think are really good rookie bets. So every time I see Zeke, it's literally like a reminder to like take a running back once Zeke goes. I don't understand why Zeke's priced where he is. He's honestly like 2 rounds too pricey to me.
Yeah. All right. I think I just physically have to end the show once we're talking about Zeke and Leonard Fournette. Like I just want to throw up in my mouth. I would have thought that we would have fully have alienated everyone, but I guess we all are reaching.
That's why you had me on the show, to ruffle some feathers.
So you said next part of the article series is coming out Friday.
Yeah, looking at the positional allocation, and it's hard because like, man, I do this analysis and it's like, there's so many ways you could chop it up and like different things I would like to look at, but I think it gives a good like macro view, and the ship chasers will be happy with the RB slander that occurs.
I'm sure they will. Yeah,
we're all very happy about that.
We do enjoy an extra helping of RB slander. It hasn't gotten old yet.
Pat able to like win 2 million with 2 running backs and then immediately
bucket 3, Pete.
Running backs
bucket
again.
3, baby.
Bucket 3.
The ADP. What I've been doing tweet threads when I first do them,
Oh,
and
we've
then linking
seen.
to the article. And the ADP value one, that wasn't too sexy, but I'm already so confident that this first tweet, like whatever I do for the running back one, it's just gonna get auto retweeted by like Drico and
What's your
Barn
hook?
Ford, you
What's your
guys.
hook?
I don't even know yet. It'll just be something about not investing in the running back position.
Yeah, it'll do well.
No, you need to go more incendiary. This one's gonna upset all the little running back piggies in the draft. I don't know. Leone, let's workshop the tweet for Max Tiltage.
Okay, we'll work
yeah.
Pat, you also, I should make sure, I know a lot of people have already checked it out, but you had a cool blog post on Legendary Upside about how you were thinking about stacking and when it's okay if you get stacked on a QB because it's going to point you toward natural diversification and even some stacks without the QB that are still very viable.
Yeah, I mean, it was just inspired by the article that we were talking about in this episode where it's like, the importance of correlation and the importance of ADP value and everything. And I was making the point that like you'll get a guy in your draft and it's like you've got Chase and someone else has Higgins, and then he comes along right before you, he grabs Burrow and he's like, couldn't stack up your guy, could you? And it's like, well, you know what, dude? You're screwed. I'm not screwed. I can actually draft Tyler Boyd later. I can draft Irv Smith later, and I can build this Cincinnati stack that has the potential to go off and give me the most important spike weeks, which are your skill position spike weeks. And then you can build with the later picks in your draft, you can build out a couple other quarterback stacks, and you set yourself up for a absolutely massive week 17 where Cincinnati has a huge game. You have 3 pieces or 2 pieces and a bring back. And then your quarterback also has a big game and you have a bring back on that. That's how you take down a field that's very likely to be bigger than 470, right? We're talking about Best Ball Mania 4 now. It was 470 last year. We need to be thinking about how are we taking out an even bigger field than that. And it's not with an unstacked early quarterback. And I think some people are playing safe with this stuff where they're like, I'm going to get this guy and I know I have my points now. And if they don't get their quarterback, then it's like, oh, my team's ruined. Your team's not ruined. You've actually had a chance now to build in an additional stack and actually add upside to your team. So don't get stressed if someone snipes your quarterback. Figure out how to continue building around what you were already going to build around and then add on an additional stack, which gives you even more upside and even more correlation.
Awesome. If you kept going, I was going to really quickly Photoshop the Leone photo and have above Hertzig's head, wide receiver drafters, and above Leone's head, running back drafters. If someone wants to make that meme, then Leone can tweet that out. All right. I appreciate you guys all in the chat. Appreciate Leone giving us so much of his time. Also, Gretsch was just feeling a little under the weather tonight, but he will be back in the saddle with us hopefully next week as we continue to roll on like sickos talking about best ball in April. And you can keep an eye out. Hopefully in the next week or two, I'm going to have my video coming out. I think it's going to be called The Anatomy of a Million. I haven't fleshed out the title yet, something like that. But we're looking at millionaire winning lineups here with Pat and Kings that won first place in the regular season. And I think you guys will enjoy that as well. You guys are also always welcome to join us in the Ship Chasing Discord. You become a YouTube member. It unlocks that. Always lots of good conversation in there. And then, of course, ADP Chasing every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. The gang will be back this week to talk about, I believe, right, Izzy just screaming up draft boards right now, Pat?
Let me tease. So I just had it's a 2-hour podcast because I couldn't end it. I kept trying to end it and then asking Sean more questions, but I had Sean Siegel on Legendary Upside. Izzy Abanikanda is his running back 3.
Ooh, okay. All right. That's spicy.
It's a good pod.
So I mean, so it's Bijan, Gibbs, and then Izzy for him?
Yeah. Yeah.
All
and
right.
The quarterbacks are not, his first quarterback hits at 104 in his super flex rankings. He's living up to his contrarian nature, Sean.
And I know he's honestly super high on JSN too.
He's super high on JSN.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't think I've even said his most contrarian take, which involves a wide receiver.
Just know that he's made me feel a little bit better about the 106 in some drafts because he likes Gibbs. Like I was getting some Gibbs FUD and he's definitely.
I think Gibbs is underrated in Dynasty. I think the best ball takes on him are pretty good. Like I'm not that bullish on him.
God, you win $2 million. It's like you don't even care about Dynasty anymore. Just got to give him best ball takes. What happened?
He's a good pick in Dynasty. That's what I'm saying.
Wow. Yeah. Just play the long game.
Segue away.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I don't think I've ever paid less attention to my Dynasty leagues ever.
I'm sure Davis will start peppering you with trade offers here soon enough, and you'll remember. All right, I'm landing the plane. Need to go do some mulch. We'll see you guys next time.